All right, so today we're going to be diving into some pretty thought-provoking stuff, the psychology of obedience. And I think this is something we can all relate to on some level, right? Like,
Oh, absolutely.
have you ever wondered if you could be, like, pressured into doing something you knew was wrong just because someone in charge told you to?
It's a question that's like fascinated thinkers for centuries. But back in 1963, there was this psychologist at Yale, Stanley Milgram, and he came up with this experiment that kind of shook things up.
Yeah, Milgram, right. I mean, this is like Psych 101 stuff,
Yeah.
It's even been made into a movie. So Milgram, he was trying to understand how, seemingly ordinary people could be involved in these really terrible acts.
Right.
Like what happened during the Holocaust, for example. So, like, how did he even go about studying this?
Well, he created this really ingenious setup, but it was also kind of scary. It involved this fake shock generator.
Shock generator.
Yeah, imagine like a device with 30 switches, each one marked with a voltage, starting at 15 volts and going all the way up to 450 volts.
450 volts. That's like dangerous, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So wait, was Milgram like actually shocking people? I mean, that's...
No, not at all. The shock generator was just a prop, but it was super convincing.
Oh, okay. That makes me feel a little better. So he had these participants, right?
Right. He recruited 40 everyday guys for his study.
Yeah.
Different backgrounds, all paid $4.50, which back then was, decent money, like $30 in today's dollars.
Not bad.
And they were told they could leave anytime.
Okay, so they knew they were participating in a study, but did they know what it was really about?
Well, they thought it was a study about learning and memory.
Learning and memory. Okay, that sounds harmless enough. So what did they actually end up doing?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. Milgram had 3 roles: the learner, the teacher, and the experimenter. But here's the twist. The learner was actually in on it, working with Milgram, pretending to be a participant.
Whoa, so it was like a setup.
Exactly. The real participant was always the teacher. And the experimenter, also an actor, was the one calling the shots.
Okay, so the teacher thinks he's teaching this other guy, but the other guy's actually an actor, and the experimenter is in charge.
Yeah, exactly.
So what did the teacher have to do?
Well, the teacher had to test the learner's memory of word pairs. For every wrong answer, they had to deliver an electric shock, and the voltage increased with each mistake.
Wait, they thought they were actually shocking this guy. I mean, even if it's fake, that's got to be stressful, right?
Oh, it was super intense. To make it even more believable, the learner, who was in another room, would shout in pain. Like, he'd pound on the wall at 300 volts and then just go silent.
Wow. I can only imagine what the teacher must have been thinking. Did they, try to stop?
Oh, yeah. A lot of them hesitated, questioned the experimenter. But the experimenter, who was wearing a lab coat, would keep urging them on. He would say things like, "The experiment requires that you continue." Or even like, "You have no other choice, you must go on."
Wow, so they're really feeling the pressure. So what happened? Did they listen to their conscience or cave to the pressure?
Well, here's the shocking part. Every single participant, all 40 of them, went to at least 300 volts, which is when the learner supposedly collapsed.
Seriously? Every single one?
Every single one.
I mean, that's seriously dangerous. They had to have known that, right?
And it gets even crazier. 65% of them obeyed all the way to the maximum, 450 volts.
65%. So 2/3 of these everyday guys were willing to deliver what they thought were potentially lethal shocks just because a guy in a lab coat told them to.
Yep, that's what the data shows.
That is mind-blowing. I mean, how could so many people go along with something so clearly wrong?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it totally blindsided the experts. They thought only a tiny fraction, like 1% to 3%, would go that far.
So were these participants secretly sadists or something?
Not at all. Remember, these were regular folks. They were visibly distressed, sweating, stuttering, even arguing with the experimenter.
Right.
But they still obeyed.
So even though they were freaking out, they still kept going.
That's right.
That's just bizarre.
After the experiment, though, Milgram debriefed everyone, told them the truth, and reunited them with the unharmed learner. He wanted to make sure they were okay, obviously.
Well, that's good to hear, at least. But this whole thing begs the question, why did they obey? What could possibly explain this?
Well, Milgram identified several factors, and I think you'll find them surprisingly relatable to your own life. First, think about the setting. Yale University, one of the most prestigious universities in the world. That alone lends a lot of credibility and authority to the whole thing.
Yeah, I guess if Yale's doing it, it can't be that bad, right?
Exactly. They were also told the study was crucial for understanding learning and memory, which probably made them feel like they were contributing to something important, like they had to participate.
Plus, they were randomly assigned their roles, so it's not like they chose to be the teacher, right?
Right, they could tell themselves, it's not my fault, I just got unlucky with the role.
And then there's the money. Even though they were told they could leave, they were still getting paid.
Yeah, that probably created a subtle pressure to just keep going.
And they were told that the shocks were painful, but not dangerous, right?
Right.
I mean, that must have made a difference.
You'd think so, but even with all of those factors, the biggest takeaway is the power of the situation itself. Milgram created this environment where obedience wasn't just expected, it was almost demanded.
So it was like they were caught in this web of authority and they couldn't break free, even when their gut was telling them something was wrong.
Precisely. And that's what makes this experiment so profound. It shows how our social context, the environment we're in, can have a huge influence on our behavior, sometimes even overriding our own personal values.
So does that mean we're all just mindless robots following orders without question?
No, not quite. Milgram actually conducted some variations of the experiment to see what would make people less likely to obey.
Oh, really? Like what? I'm curious to hear about that.
Well, in one variation, he brought the learner and the teacher closer together, put them in the same room, and suddenly seeing the learner's supposed pain firsthand, it made a big difference. Obedience dropped significantly.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of like that saying out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's more like out of sight, easier to obey.
Right. Exactly, yeah. That physical proximity, actually seeing the consequences of their actions, it made it a lot harder to just follow orders.
So, distance really does play a role, huh?
Yeah.
What else did Milgram change?
Well, he also kind of messed with the authority figure. So in another variation, instead of being right there in the room, the experimenter gave instructions over the phone.
Ah, so taking away that imposing presence, that face-to-face authority.
Right, and guess what? Obedience dropped again. That physical and psychological distance from the authority figure really weakened its hold on people.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about blindly following orders. There are all these subtle factors that come into play. Did Milgram find anything else that affected obedience?
Yeah, here's the most telling one. When participants were allowed to choose the shock level themselves, without any pressure from the experimenter, no one went above 45 volts.
Whoa, seriously. So left to their own devices, they were actually, pretty decent folks. It kind of undermines that idea that we're all just waiting for an authority figure to turn us into monsters, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah. It suggests that it's not necessarily inherent cruelty that drives obedience,
Yeah.
but the powerful influence of, external pressure and authority. We're more likely to do something we think is wrong when someone else tells us to do it. Think about it. Have you ever felt pressured at work to do something you knew wasn't quite right just because your boss insisted?
Oh, totally. I think everyone's been there at some point. It's you don't want to disappoint them or you're worried about the consequences of, speaking up.
Exactly. And that's what makes Milgram's experiment so relevant, even today. It's not just about shocking people in a lab. It's about understanding the pressures we all face in everyday life.
So we're not just talking about extreme situations like the Holocaust, but also more everyday examples of obedience to authority, like following, questionable orders from a boss or conforming to social pressure, even when it goes against our gut feeling.
Absolutely, yeah. It's about recognizing that these dynamics are everywhere and understanding how they can, influence our behavior.
That's kind of unsettling, to be honest. Knowing that we could be so easily swayed by authority figures, even to do things we know are wrong, what can we do about it? How can we, protect ourselves from falling into this obedience trap?
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
Yeah.
It's something that researchers and ethicists have been wrestling with ever since Milgram's experiment.
So what have they come up with? Are there any, strategies for becoming more aware of these subtle influences?
Well, one key takeaway is the importance of critical thinking. Don't just blindly accept everything you're told, especially when it comes to requests or demands that make you feel uncomfortable.
So basically, don't be afraid to ask questions and, challenge authority. But isn't that kind of risky, especially in a work environment?
It can be, yeah. But developing that healthy skepticism is crucial. Ask yourself, why am I being asked to do this? Is this really the right thing to do? What are the potential consequences? Sometimes those questions might lead you to go against the grain, to speak up when everyone else is silent.
That takes guts, though. It's easy to say question authority, but it's a lot harder to actually do it, especially when you're dealing with someone, powerful or intimidating.
You're right, it does take courage. But remember what Milgram's experiment showed. When people feel personally responsible for their actions, they're far less likely to just blindly obey. It's about recognizing that you always have a choice, even in situations where you feel pressured.
I guess it comes down to having a strong sense of your own values and being willing to stand up for them, even when it's difficult.
Exactly. Another important factor is social support. Milgram found that obedience rates plummeted when participants had an ally, someone else who was also questioning the experimenter.
So having someone else on your side, someone who shares your concerns, can make it easier to resist those pressures.
Absolutely. It's like creating a culture of dissent, where questioning authority is seen as a strength, not a weakness. Think about whistleblowers, people who expose wrongdoing within their organizations, often at great personal risk. They're basically going up against the Milgram experiment in real life.
Yeah, that takes incredible bravery. It's like they're choosing their moral compass over obedience to authority. It's amazing that people like that exist.
It is, and it shows that even in the face of, immense pressure, we can choose to do what we believe is right.
So we've talked a lot about the negative side of obedience, but are there any positive aspects to it? I mean, doesn't society kind of need some level of obedience to function?
That's a great point. It's true that a certain amount of obedience is necessary for things to run smoothly.
Yeah.
Huh? Imagine if everyone constantly questioned every rule and instruction. It'd be chaos.
Yeah, that's true. So it's not about eliminating obedience altogether, but rather about finding that balance between, following rules and thinking for ourselves.
Exactly. And that's where critical thinking comes in again. It's about being able to discern when obedience is necessary and beneficial, and when it's being used to manipulate or control us.
It's like knowing when to follow the rules of the road and when to question authority if you see something that seems unjust or unethical.
Precisely. Milgram's work has really highlighted those complexities, hasn't it?
It really has. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored, the shocking findings of Milgram's experiment, the psychological mechanisms behind obedience, and even how it plays out in our everyday lives. What do you think are the most important takeaways from all of this?
Well, for me, the biggest one is the realization that even ordinary people, under the right circumstances, can do things they never thought possible.
So it's like that reminder that we're all capable of both good and evil, and that the power of the situation can really influence our behavior.
Exactly, yeah. And that knowledge is crucial for understanding things like the Holocaust, but also for navigating our own lives. It's about recognizing the potential for both darkness and light within ourselves, and making conscious choices that align with our values.
It's also a call to action, isn't it? To cultivate that critical thinking, to speak up against injustice, and to create a world where blind obedience is less likely to occur.
Absolutely, yeah. Milgram's experiment wasn't just about understanding the past, it was about shaping a better future.
It's incredible to think that this one experiment, done decades ago, can still spark such intense discussion and debate.
Yeah, Milgram's work definitely hit a nerve,
Yeah.
It forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and, how much we're influenced by others.
It's almost like he held up this mirror to human nature, and we didn't always like what we saw.
But that's the power of research like this, right? It challenges our assumptions, makes us think critically, and ultimately helps us understand ourselves and the world a little bit better.
And it's not just about understanding history, right? Milgram's work is still relevant today, informing research in fields like social psychology, organizational behavior, even criminology.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For instance, there's a fascinating research on whistleblowers, people who speak out about wrongdoing in their organizations, often putting their careers on the line.
Talk about courage, right? Especially when you consider that immense pressure to conform, to keep quiet, to not rock the boat.
It's like a real-life version of Milgram's experiment, where people have to choose between loyalty to authority and following their conscience.
And it's not just whistleblowing either. Milgram's work has helped us understand things like groupthink, where the desire for harmony in a group leads to bad decisions.
Right, think about historical examples like the Bay of Pigs invasion or the Challenger disaster. Groups of intelligent people made terrible choices, partly because dissent was silenced or ignored.
Yeah, that's pretty sobering. It shows that even without a clear authority figure, the pressure to conform can be incredibly strong. So how do we fight that? How can we develop that, healthy skepticism, that willingness to question and challenge even when it's uncomfortable?
Well, I think it all starts with awareness. We need to be tuned in to situations where we might be vulnerable to blindly obeying.
Like when we're under a lot of pressure, or everyone around us seems to agree, or we're dealing with a charismatic or intimidating person in a position of power.
Exactly. Once we recognize those situations, we can start developing strategies to, resist those pressures.
So taking a step back, questioning assumptions, seeking out different perspectives,
Yeah.
and finding allies who share our values.
Right. And sometimes it means having the courage to just say no, even when it feels risky.
That's easier said than done. But it's essential. It's about taking back our own agency, recognizing that we always have a choice.
Yeah, remember, you don't have to be a hero to make a difference. Small acts of resistance, like questioning a bad decision or voicing a dissent, it can have a ripple effect.
It's about fostering a culture where critical thinking and moral courage are valued.
Absolutely. That's a legacy worth striving for, to create a world where we think for ourselves, make ethical choices, and stand up for what's right.
So, to wrap up our deep dive today, we've learned that obedience is a powerful force. It can be dangerous when abused, but it's also necessary for society to function. The key takeaway for me is the importance of awareness, critical thinking, and the courage to make our own choices.
Yeah, I think that's right. Milgram's experiment is a stark reminder that even ordinary people are capable of both great and terrible things. And understanding the factors that contribute to obedience can help us navigate the complexities of our world and, make choices that align with their values.
It's a challenging task, but Milgram has given us the tools to start asking the right questions and demand better from ourselves and, those in authority.
So as you go about your day, remember the power of authority, but also remember your own power to resist, to question, and to choose.
That's a great note to end on. I hope this deep dive has left you with a new sense of awareness, a healthy dose of skepticism, and a commitment to making ethical choices even when it's hard. Until next time, keep exploring, questioning, and learning.